Beautiful morning to our esteemed viewers, and welcome to the first edition of the week on Newspaper Headlines, reaching you live from the studios of the Advent Cable Network Nigeria, ACNNTV. So many events to look out for this past week as we go through the national dailies. I'm Rachel Igbunu, and I'll take it with the Daily Trust newspaper. Take it with the lead story: chemicals in preserved beans cause cancer, kidney disease. The kickers: applied quantity exceed limit for human consumption. Guidelines on pesticides must be followed. This is coming from an expert. Why I avoid inorganic chemicals in bees preservation. This is coming from a farmer. And we have some health effects on chemicals in preserved beans. We have headache, dizziness, cancer. Newspaper to know more on this effect of chemicals in beans. Right, the bottom strip stories. Southern Kaduna, Khan seeks more action as CP deploys additional troops. Get the details on page 6. On that same page, parents reject 25,000 naira COVID-19 test levy for students. Man invests breast cancer dictating bra to save rural women. See the story on page 8. And above the lead story, there is sabotage in counter-insurgency operation, Zulum insists. See the details on page 3. On page 36, 2023 presidency. It will be unfair for APC to field northern candidates. This is coming from Ndume. And finally, from the Daily Trust newspaper, how SMEs assessed 50 billion naira CBN loan. See the details on page 10. We'll move on to the Nigerian Tribune newspaper, and I'll take it from the top. Trading Nigeria's sovereignty for loan height of irresponsibility. This is coming from Atiku. Review all foreign loan agreements, PDP tells NAS. See the story on page 4. And on that same page, Labour calls out workers for nationwide protest next week over unresolved issues of corruption. UN worried as explosive killed 230 Nigerians in 2 years. The story can be found on page 29. Below the masthead, NDIC to revoke licenses of 37 weak microfinance banks. The story is on page 7. And on page 24, Ondo Guba, PDP moves to stop deputy governor from joining ZLP. School reopening. Parents protest 25,000 naira COVID-19 test in Ogun State. The details can be found on page 2. Now to the lead story on Nigerian Tribune. 3.313 billion naira Chinese loan. Nigeria pays $461 million. Still owes $3.3 billion. Serap wants court to compel Buhari to publish details of government loans since 2015. The story can be found on pages 4 and 6. Now, status of loans obtained from China Exim as of March 31, 2020. The details are on this paper, Nigerian Tribune. Besides that, why central banks must prioritize transparency. This is coming from IMF, and the story can be found on page 7. Ibadan Jericho Hospital section shut as health workers test positive for COVID-19. The details can be found on page 3. Now, last story on Nigerian Tribune. Rotation can end after South gets power in 2023. This is coming from the Ariwa youths. Nigerians should determine what happens in 2023. This is coming from Babangida Aliyu, former Niger State Governor. and the details can be found on pages 23 and 26. We move on to Blueprint newspaper, and I'll take it below the mark. Outrage as parents protest 25,000 naira COVID-19 test fee in Ogun. SSCE. Ondo students resume. Government warns erring students. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 6. Page 26. Excitement as Dangote Cement promo winners emerge. Oyo embraces renewable energy. See the details on page 25. Now the lead story. Serap to court. Compel Buhari to publish details of government loans since 2015. The kickers. Stop trading off Nigeria's sovereignty for reckless borrowing. Atiku tells federal government. NAS should review all foreign loans agreements now. This is coming from PDP. Nigeria will settle $500 million debt in 20 years. It's coming from Amechi. Says repayment has commenced. The story can be found on page 6. We have this picture from left Chief of Air Staff, Air Marshal Sadiq Abubakar, with Katsina State Governor Aminu Bello Masari at the luncheon organized by the NAF to celebrate the Eid el-Kabir with frontline troops in Katsina. This happened on Saturday. Generator fume kills 7 hairdressers in Niger State. The story can be found on page 24. Now on the bottom strip stories. TUC CSOs to lead protest over corruption in NDDC and EFCC. See the details on page 7. On that same page, Enugu demolishes sinking 3-story building. Page 5. Ibadan indigenes must emerge next University of Ibadan VC. This is coming from the CCII, and the story is on page 5. On page 13, which is the last story on the Blueprint newspaper, Ikpeazu sacks Transport Commissioner, local government chair. That is on page 13. Next is New Telegraph newspaper, and I'll take it from the top. Bad debts. GSI operation takes off amid legal concerns. Banks to seize deposits. Investments of loan defaulters. The story starts from the front page. It continues on page 6. On page 25, Bristol pilots, engineers down tools, reject salary benchmark. That story is on page 35. Below the masthead, price band, tension grips depots, filling stations as PPPRA delays. That story is on page 6. And on page 3, loans, apologize to Nigerians, Atiku tells Buhari. BUA Cement reports 101 billion naira profit in 6 months. See the details on page 29. And on page 30, parent protest as Ogun imposes 25,000 naira for students' COVID-19 test. Now on the lead story. COVID-19 forces states to cut 3 trillion naira from budgets. Oil price slump threatens states' revenue. Governors review economic impacts of pandemic. The story can be found on page 3. In amount slashed from 36 states' 2020 budgets. Total states budget for 2020, we have 9.2 trillion naira. Revised budget, 6.2 trillion naira. Now, COVID-19 global cases, 18,163,815. Global recovery, 11,406,162. Global deaths, 690,777. The bottom strip stories. National Assembly initiates 1,440 bills in 13 months. The kicker. Senate 414. Reps 1,026. 42 lawmakers, 72 bills killed through. That story can be found on page 6. And on page 29, which happens to be the last story on New Telegraph newspaper, e-cigarettes can raise risk of heart problems. That's a research, and the details can be found on page 29. Right about now, we pause here to observe a short break. When we return, newspaper headlines will be back with more information. Please stay tuned.
Crossfire is a program that treats controversial topics on diverse issues surrounding the church and the society.
Technology drove the inflow or the outbursts of people having Bibles because of printing technology. Same way, the digital revolution has also made it possible for people to have Bibles in various formats in their hands.
As an Anglican, I believe in Anglicanism. And Anglicanism is standing on the tripod of scripture, tradition, and reason. When we are about to read the Holy Gospel, all members will be made to stand up. Assuming the gospel are read from the phone, and he says this is the gospel of Christ, you are likely to confuse a lot of people. Because people will be seeing phone in your hand.
In the history of Holy Communion, we've never heard that somebody contacted the deeds from the other person.
The truth is that when people are gathered together and anything happens, whether it is an earthquake or it is a disease or anything, it spreads faster and there are more fatalities. That's just what I'm talking about.
The first evangelist in the Bible was a woman of Samaria that Jesus met at the well. Immediately this woman met Jesus. She went into the town and started telling everybody that come and see somebody who told me everything about myself.
The women actually supported the ministry of Christ, supported the ministry of the apostles, but they were never called apostles.
Thank you for staying tuned. Let's see what the other papers have to say. We will continue with This Day newspaper, and I'll take it from the top. No stolen Nigerian crude oil in China, NNPC insists. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 49. On page 8, low prices boost stock market by 113 billion naira in July. And below the masthead, sabotage prolonging insurgency war, says Borno governor. Military takes delivery of new weapons for Northeast. Focus on rehabilitation of victims of violence. SAN tells federal government. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 12. The lead story concerns Mount over loan agreement clause waiving Nigeria's sovereignty immunity. Experts fear repeat of fate of Zambia. Experts fear repeat of fate of Zambia, says waiver of immunity unconstitutional. The story starts from the front page, it continues on page 12. Maritime matters, that of the President's National Association of Stevedoring Companies, Mr. Bolaji, and the Director General, Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA, Dr. Bashir Jomo, during a courtesy visit by the association to the agency in Lagos. This happened recently. And the last story on This Day newspaper, PDP governors to battle federal government over alleged breaches of constitution. See the details on page 5. Leadership newspaper is next. Take it from below the masthead. Leadership. 2 others lead in advert placement. The story starts from the front page. It continues on page 4. On page 15, stock market gains 112 billion naira in July. That story is on page 15. Now to the lead story. 2023, APC moves to whistle down PDP structure. The kickers. Boni-led caretaker committee woos Atiku, Saraki, Kwankwaso, others back to governing party. Babangida Aliyu backs Mamandara, says 20 years of zoning has failed. My alliance with Akume instrumental to electoral victory. This is coming from Obasake prescribes stiff penalties for perpetrators of violence in Edo governorship poll. Ex-minister emerges Imo PDP chairman. The story can be found on page 4. Beside the picture, COVID-19. Federal government evacuates 170 Nigerians from Rwanda, Uganda. The kickers. Ondo fumigates schools ahead of resumption. Osun imposes 100,000 fine on worship centers. The story starts from the front page. It continues on page 8. The bottom strip stories. Federal government insures 89,000 civil servants with 15 billion naira. Sarah Jibril slams Big Brother Nigeria for promoting Satanism. The story can be found on page 2. On page 11, pensioners give fund 7 days to reverse 50% pension cuts. Now to the last story. NDLEA arrests soldier with 30 live ammunitions and Indian hymns. We move on to the next paper, which is Nigerian Pilots. I'll take it below the masthead. Boko Haram and ISWAP terrorists execute 20 prisoners, 2 soldiers. The story can be found on page 9. On page 6, Presidency. Mamandara didn't speak Buhari's mind. Analysis. Over 33 trillion naira debt downs Nigeria. The story starts from the front page. It continues on page 36. Now to the lead story. Mortgage sovereignty. PDP. Atiku kick says APC secretly mortgaging Nigeria's sovereignty. Insists APC has placed Nigeria on the international auction market. Without loans, there will be no development. Amechi insists. The story is on page 8. And we have this picture of Kaduna State Christian leaders in an indoor prayer and protest session over the southern Kaduna killings in Kaduna. This happened yesterday. Page 5. Magu. Ayo Salami. I take that story again. Magu. Ayo Salami panel uncovers 571 bank accounts. That story is on page 5. The bottom strip stories. Parents kick as school levy 25,000 naira for COVID-19 test in Ogun. Story is on page 6. On page 5. IPOB resolves to resist Mieti Allah's security. Protests rock Kaduna over persist killings. That story is on page 7. Banditry. Governor Masari says local communities sabotaging efforts. See the details on page 5. And on page 6, corruption. 150 civil society groups seek probe resignation of Malami. The last story on Nigerian pilots. Reps summon NNPC, NAOC, Wando over $30 million, 70 million naira debts. That story is on page 7. Now we'll go to the business world on Business Day newspaper. It leads with this story. The human phase of an economy growing slower than population growth. The kicker. What is coming next? And we have this Nigeria economy in last 5 years. As of 2015, 2.5%. 2016, minus 1.6%. 2017, 0.8%. 2018, 1.9%. 2.27%. That is 2019. IMF forecast says, according to IMF's mission chief to Nigeria, the negative trend of per capita GDP growth could last another 5 years. It means the average Nigerian will get even poorer and few people will be able to afford quality healthcare and education. Now to the pain on households and businesses. Multiple taxation, inefficient transportation networks and inadequate power supply. Corruption and ill government policy are factors pushing foreign or local investors off a cliff. The story starts from the front page, it continues on page 26. Nigerian diasporas in U.S. top list of high-earning immigrants. The story starts from the front page, it continues on page 30. The last story, an inside story. Nigeria's plan to acquire $18.12 billion scanners heightens hope for automation of cargo clearance. See the details on page 2. This is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of Newspaper Headlines. Thank you for a fresh edition. I give you with these words from Psalm 127 verse 1, which says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. And unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain." So let the Lord into the affairs of your life. Have a productive week and stay blessed. Bye from here.
How do I get tested?